Joining me now on set is Keisha Lance Bottoms, former mayor of Atlanta and now the senior advisor for public engagement in the Biden administration. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about what we expect to hear tonight. White House officials say that President Biden wants to deliver an optimistic message tonight on the economy, on the State of the Union. How does he sell that message when 71% of Americans say the country's headed in the wrong direction?
Well, I think we have to remember we've been through a tough time in this country. You don't just turn on the switch and everybody suddenly feels better. The past few years with the pandemic and death and so much that we have experienced globally is still weighing very heavily on people. But the good news is that there is good news coming out of this administration. When you look at the economy, you look at how strong those numbers are. Record unemployment rate for African Americans, jobs created, and the list goes on and on. American Rescue Plan funds. I can speak directly to that as a former mayor. That was a game changer for cities and counties across America. So there's a story to be told, but also there's more work to be done. The president's going to remind us that there is a job that needs to be completed. So it's understandable that people may not feel great right now. But we believe that as people begin to see and feel the impact of the changes that this administration has made, then you'll see things shift.
And let's talk about the economy. Let's delve into some of those numbers, because as you say, that really is the top issue for so many Americans. And when you look at the polling, only 36% of Americans say they approve of the president's handling of the economy. The president is going to say, look at jobs. They're at their highest rate in some 50 years. Why is there this disconnect? Is this a failure in messaging or implementation of his policies?
Well, again, I think it just really is based on where we are right now in this country. It's going to take time for us to feel better. But the good news is that there are things that are happening that are changing the lives of Americans. I've been on the ballot a few times, so I know that poll numbers are a snapshot in time, and that's why it's important as a candidate, as someone who's holding office, you don't ever get too high and you don't get too low. You stay focused on the agenda. And for this president, making the economy stronger has been a pillar of his agenda.
I've been talking to some of the president's allies who say that this next phase needs to focus on implementation, that the infrastructure law, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, Americans aren't feeling that. They aren't feeling that in their everyday lives, in their pocketbooks. Does this administration need to shift focus and try to implement the laws that have now been passed more aggressively?
Well, I can tell you that as I've had conversations internally just on how we focus public engagement, implementation has been the key word. So that's not news to this White House. We know that implementation is important. We know that it's important that people now know that insulin has been capped at $35 a month for seniors. We also know when we talk about infrastructure that people begin to see changes happening in their communities, whether it's the bridge repairs or lead pipes being replaced. And there's so many other things that have come into law. And now we know that people have to see it and feel it to know that it's making a difference.
But wages have actually not kept pace with inflation. They've gone down effectively since the president took office. Does he bear responsibility for that?
Well, we know that the president has focused very heavily on the economy. There were many who questioned his policies, but when you see...
But do you think the president should take responsibility to some extent for the fact that wages have not kept up with inflation?
Well, I think that there's all responsibility is shared by everyone, not just the president, but we have to look at where we are with Congress, with policies as it relates to where our wages are. We have to look at our companies. But the reality is this, 10 million people applied to create small businesses in this country. 12 million new jobs were created, 500,000 jobs just last month. So it may not be perfect yet, but we are on a really solid path to making a difference with the economy.
Let's talk about some of the issues looming large over this speech. You have the issue of classified documents, the Chinese spy balloon. Will President Biden directly address the Chinese spy balloon tonight?
Well, what the president will talk about, and I haven't seen the speech, the latest draft of the speech. There have been several drafts. It was still being rewritten as late as this afternoon. But I do know that the president will talk about the need for us to remain strong on the world stage. stage. He'll also talk about bringing jobs back to America from China.
Did the last draft that you see directly mention the Chinese spy balloon?
Well, I didn't see the draft in its entirety, but I do know that when we talk about national security, that's something that the president believes is extremely important. And, you know, we've seen him talk about what his feelings about the spy balloon, why he made the decisions that he did based on information from our national security advisors. And we knew there was a spy balloon, which of course is very different than what we now know from the previous administration.
And just the previous administration says they were not aware of that this intelligence is something new that they're getting. Let me ask you about what Kelly was just talking about, the guests in the First Lady's box. We know that the family members of Tyree Nichols will be there. What will his message be on police reform? And will he say he's open to a compromise, something, for example, that does not include qualified immunity protections for officers?
Well, I was in a meeting just last Thursday with the Congressional Black Caucus, with the president, the vice president in the Oval Office, and there were a number of things that were discussed as to how we can move the needle. The president has not given up on the George Floyd bill in its entirety, and I don't believe that the caucus has either. But certainly, there are things on the table and up for discussion. So the president has done what he could do with the power of his pen through executive order, and he's willing to give whatever support that needs to be given to Congress to get it over the finish line.
President Biden, I am told, is going to repeat the refrain, "Finish the job" tonight, which sounds a lot like a pitch for re-election. Is that going to be his campaign slogan?
Well, I can't speak to that, but I do know there is a job to be finished in this term from this White House, and that's what he's going to continue to focus on.
I've spoken to a lot of Republicans who say what they want to hear tonight from the president is a bipartisan message, given that Congress is now divided, given that Speaker McCarthy will be sitting right behind him. How does finish the job square with a bipartisan message? Will he deliver a bipartisan message?
Well, you've watched his president for a long time. You know that in the Senate, he built his career on getting things done in a bipartisan way. Some of the biggest things we've been able to get accomplished in this administration, from gun reform, the changes in the gun laws, to the infrastructure bill, chips. These things have been done through a bipartisan way. So the president's not giving up on that. We just need Republicans in Congress to meet us halfway so we can continue to deliver for the American people.
Okay. Well, we will be watching very closely. Keisha Lance Bottoms, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate the information and you're joining us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.